Newsflash, newsflash. For the followers of this channel, I just want you all to know that I am not a millennial. I'm just a bit older. And I can remember when Japan was buying up the United States. The story was that Japan was going to rival the US economy and its industry was going to take over the world. I was skeptical that that would happen, but the experts were convinced, and they were saying things like the Japanese imperial palace was more valuable than all of California. That was astonishing to me, and of course, pretty outlandish. But it led me to research on population and how population impacts markets and the economy. And so recently I came across a very good article from Chris Hamilton via Economica blog. And the article serves two purposes. Number one, it shows how you should be skeptical of government information. And number two, it brings out the importance that population has on the economy and markets. So let's take a look. So reading to you from the article from Chris Hamilton, again via Economica blog, it reads as follows. To say I've become skeptical of markets and their movements is probably an understatement. However, rather than waste more time trying to make sense of these skewed markets, I believe real economic activity is more accurately represented by changing populations and their energy consumption. So today, we'll play a little To Tell the Truth, an old television show where two imposters could lie, but one contestant had to tell the truth. The celebrities would ask questions and then attempt to pick which contestant was the real deal. I'll lay out the data and let you determine how well this lines up with non-stop narrative of record market valuations and stories of strong economic activity. I'll start with Japan and work my way up progressively larger. The population data is from the United Nations, and I have used the 15 to 60-year-old population to avoid speculation about changing birth rates over the next 15 years. And the energy data is from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, or the EIA, and their projections using their IEO 2017, which is the International Energy Outlook models. So energy is an important ingredient, or should I say measure, because if you look back through history and track energy sources and usage, you'll find that it had a huge impact on industrial ages and the rise and fall of nations. Just think about the industrial age here in the United States and John D. Rockefeller. You'll find a very strong correlation with energy and the economies. So it is a good measure. And looking at this chart here, you can see that the core population peak for Japan was at about 1993. And as a side note, the stock market and the Japanese economy peaked in about 1989 to 1991. So there is more than just coincidence to the population. Now, the estimate for Japan is a decline of population of about 14% since as of 2015, and it will decline 22% by 2030 and then 33% by 2040. And you can see here the energy consumption peak was in 2006 and has declined about 17 cents. Now, the author's estimate is a further decline of 25% by 2030 and then negative 30% by 2040. And at the same time, the IOE 2017 estimate is a plus 3% by 2030 and no change by the year 2040. Does that make sense? Not in my opinion. Let's go to the next chart. This here is Italy, and there is no estimate of the energy consumption estimates by the IEO, but I think still this chart will serve our purposes here. And you can see that the core population peaked in about 2005 and has declined about 4% since, and is expected to decline by 17% in 2030 and by 25% by 2040. And the energy consumption peaked also in 2005 and has declined 17% since. The author has estimated that energy consumption will decline by about 26% by 2030 and by 32% in 2040. Now, Italy is interesting. It's in the news right now. They're having significant difficulties in their economy and particularly their stock market and in their banking sector of the stock market. So this is very interesting. We see quite a drop off both in population and energy. And is the Italian economy going to improve? Not in my opinion. Next chart. And this is the chart of Western Europe showing the core population peaked in about 2008 and has declined by about 1% since then. And the population is expected to further decline 8% by 2030 and 12% by 2040. With regard to the energy consumption, it peaked in 2006 and has declined about 8.5% since then. And the author it estimates that a further decline of 16% in energy by 2030 and 19% decline by 2040. Whereas the EIA estimates an increase of energy of 11% and 16% by 2030 and 2040 respectively. And looking at the chart, that does not appear to be reality. Let's go to the next chart. And this is Russia, one of the world's largest energy producers, showing that core population peaked in 2007 with a decline of about 6.5% since then. Expectations are a further decline 16% by 2030 and a population decline of 19% by 2040. And then the energy consumption peaked in 2015 with a decline of about 3% since then. And the author estimates that the decline in energy will be 19% by 2030 and 23% by 2040, whereas the IEO estimates that there will be no change through 2040. And excuse me with regard to all of these letters here. I read IEO and IEA, and I tend to think EIEIO. Okay, let's move on. And this chart here is China. And China is interesting is because they are the most recent country that is expected to rival the U.S. economy and again take over the world. And I think through the population as shown here in this chart, I think they're going to be wrong about China, but only time will tell. And with regard to China, the core population peaked in about 2011 and has declined about 1% since then. Expected to decline by 9% in 2030 and then 16% by 2040. And a 16% decline means about 154 million people. So that's half the population of the US, or roughly half the population. With regard to energy consumption, it likely peaked before 2020, and the numbers from China really aren't all that reliable, and that's why there's an estimate here, because they are not famous for telling the truth, at least with regard to their economy. And the energy consumption is expected to decline by 8% in 2030 and then by 19% by 2040. And then the EIA estimates a 35% increase by 2030 and 45% increase by 2040. Again, like the other charts, not all that likely. Let's go to the last chart. And then this last chart here is the United States. And I'm not going to drone on about the population or energy statistics here. I'll just make a few comments. And number one is that we're in a much better shape than the other countries, including China. And that leads me to believe, at least in regard to the population and energy and such, as we have an economic advantage over China. And maybe that'll help with regard to our trade relations. And then number two, The reason that we have an advantage is in the population, and we have that advantage because of immigration. I don't want to get too political to you. We just need to make some good decisions here in this country, but we do have an advantage, and in large part to immigration. So, our immigration policy, we need to make some smart decisions. So, think about that. And for today, that's ChewDog Charts. Thank you.